a lonely farmhouse at the edge of a Wisconsin road. Snow drifts in the yard. A single light burns in a second-floor window. Neighbors wave when the man with the bent shoulders walks past, but they don't invite him in. He keeps to himself. Polite, withdrawn, almost invisible. Then the police knock, and everything ordinary about that winter morning fractures. What they found inside that house didn't fit the quiet image. It rewrote a town's sense of safety, inspired spine-chilling headlines, and seeped into American nightmares. This is the story of Ed Gein, how an isolated life became a national obsession, how family and faith warped into something dangerous, and why the echoes of a single farmhouse would reverberate through pop culture for decades. In any small community, disappearances sometimes dissolve into rumor. Someone left town, someone ran off, someone started a new life. But when a local businesswoman failed to open her shop and did not answer calls, worry grew. More than one woman in the region had vanished over time, and the pattern finally pierced the town's complacency. Investigators followed ordinary leads, friends, co-workers, the last places the missing had been seen. A series of small clues, a delivery driver's memory, a neighbor's observation. Those small details, stitched together, pointed toward the farmhouse at the edge of town. Police knocked with the hope of questions. What they would uncover forced a very different response. When officers entered Ed Gein's home, they found things that made clear this was not a case of temporary absence. The house contained arrangements and objects that suggested patterns of behavior rather than an isolated incident. Items were evidence of actions investigators could not ignore. The tone in the room shifted from investigative curiosity to grim certainty. At that moment, the case stopped being about rumor and started being about accountability. Ed Gein was taken into custody. What followed was not a tidy confession, but a series of fractured statements, admissions and fragments that hinted at a life shaped by loss, compulsion, and a relationship with the past that crossed into the criminal. Ed Gein did not fit Hollywood's stereotype of a calculating killer. He was socially awkward, profoundly isolated, and bound for much of his life by the memory of a domineering mother. Psychiatrists later traced a life of emotional deprivation, rigid religious instruction, and maladaptive coping. Those elements do not excuse violent acts, but they offer a window into how a life can detach from shared social norms. During interviews and evaluations, Gein spoke haltingly about his upbringing, about the emotional hold his mother exerted, and about a yearning that turned inward in grim ways. Clinicians concluded he suffered severe mental disturbance. The legal debate that followed would hinge on whether those disturbances rendered him legally responsible in the manner the criminal courts require. When the case reached the courtroom, the matter was less about theatrical confessions and more about psychiatric competence. Experts examined Gein's mental state, and the court had to balance public safety with medical reality. Unlike clear-cut cases of premeditated malice, this trial forced the justice system to ask a harder question. Was this a crime of will or a product of profound mental illness? The court concluded that Gein was not fit for a conventional criminal sentence. Instead of a long prison term, the legal outcome was commitment to psychiatric care, an institutional path focused on treatment and containment rather than the standard penal route. For a public hungry for retribution and for families seeking closure, that resolution felt incomplete. For the legal system, it reflected the difficult boundary between illness and culpability. It's crucial again to center the human toll. Behind each lead, and each courtroom transcript were people, mothers, sisters, friends, whose lives were stolen or whose worlds were upended. The public fascination with the oddities of the farmhouse risks eclipsing these losses. Those who mourned had no appetite for the lurid headlines. They wanted names remembered and explanations that might prevent future tragedies. Communities responded with grief and practical measures, memorials for victims, calls for better reporting, and uneasy conversations about how a neighbor's isolation could go unnoticed until it was too late. The Gein story captured national attention because it struck a deep cultural chord. The idea that monstrous acts could come from a deeply ordinary exterior, unsettled people. Journalists, filmmakers, and novelists found resonant themes: the haunted house, the domineering parent, the collapse of privacy, and wove those motifs into books and films. Elements of Gein's life reverberated through American pop culture, inspirations for iconic fictional characters, plot threads in horror cinema, and a recurring trope about the secret behind closed doors. That translation from real tragedy to fiction opened ethical questions. How do creators retell real suffering without exploiting it? How does culture turn fact into legend? And what do we lose when it does? Beyond headlines and films, the case forced institutions to look inward. Where had warning signs been missed? How did stigma and neglect around mental health contribute to a slow-motion calamity? The answers were complicated. A mix of limited resources in rural communities, social isolation, and systems ill-prepared to detect and treat people drifting toward dangerous behavior. The Gein story is less a simple checklist of failures and more a mirror. It reflects how social neglect, family dynamics, and inadequate care can combine and produce outcomes that shock us precisely because they came from a neighbor we assumed we knew. In the years after the farmhouse door opened, the town kept moving forward, but not without marks. Some residents moved away, others organized to strengthen community ties and mental health services. The farmhouse itself became a locus of whispered memory, a place people avoided, yet could never fully forget. Ed Gein's life and the crimes investigators uncovered force an uncomfortable question. How do communities detect and help people teetering on the edge of harm? The story offers no simple answers, only hard responsibilities. If we tell it responsibly, we remember the victims first, examine the system second, and demand better so that isolation and untreated illness do not calcify into tragedy.